I'm confused. And it's not just me. Over the last decade, many political rivals were still operating as if politics were primarily about policy, knowledge, experience, and persuasive debate. They believed that command of issues and competence within the traditional rules of politicking would eventually put them on top. But again and again, that assumption failed. I needed a framework that could explain why so many highly intelligent people, otherwise rational actors, kept misreading the game. Not because their opponents were irrational, but because they were operating from a fundamentally different premise. What they underestimated was the power of communication. In a system shaped by attention, expectation, and escalation, simple signaling often matters more than policy. Not because policy is relevant, but because it only matters when the audience believes that it will actually shape behavior. Some political actors don't play for policy outcomes, coalition support, or even approval. They play entirely from inside their own frame of reference. In psychological terms, that's called solipsism, a condition where the self is the only point of reference that really exists. And when rational actors assume shared incentives that simply aren't there, they don't just lose debates, they get outmaneuvered. I found that once I saw it that way, politics starts to look less like a policy debate and more like a contest for advantage. And when politics starts to behave like a game, it makes sense to study the rules that govern games. Before we go any further, there's one idea I need to share with you. It's a concept from game theory called a Nash Equilibrium, named after mathematician John Nash, whose work reshaped economics and later earned both the Nobel Prize and the Abel Prize, and inspired the film A Beautiful Mind. We don't need the math to understand it. A Nash equilibrium describes a situation where each player is doing what makes sense for them, given what they expect everyone else to do. It doesn't describe the best outcome. It describes a stable one. Once a stable balance is reached, no single player can improve their position by changing course alone, even if the outcome is bad for everyone involved. We can see a Nash equilibrium play out in real time in the film C'était un rendezvous. In August of 1976, at dawn in Paris, filmmaker Claude Lelouch climbed into his Mercedes-Benz and raced across the city without stopping, running many red lights, cutting blind corners, and trusting that everyone else would obey the law. This only worked because everyone else did obey the rules. However, if one hadn't, and another moment had made the same calculation, the system would have collapsed. The strategy only works as long as it stays rare. If we think of a four-way stop intersection modeled on a first-to-arrive, first-to-go basis, where all vehicles must come to a complete stop, we can map the driver's strategy in a decision matrix. A decision matrix is just a way of laying out choices on a grid, and the consequences of those choices side by side. So here's the board. Driver B is across the top, driver A is down the side. Each side has two choices, run or stop. Each box represents an outcome, what happens when one choice meets another. The small numbers you see in each box don't represent money, virtual points. They represent the strength of relative outcomes. Higher numbers are better. 0 is catastrophic. Upper right, run, run, 0, 0. We move to the right, 1, 3. We move down to the bottom left, 3, 1. We go to the bottom right, 2, 2. Once each driver accounts for the possibility that the other might run, the tempting outcome collapses. The only outcome that doesn't is stop, stop. And that's the Nash equilibrium. And if this feels like a silly example, okay, because game theory structure is what matters here. Game theory, it's at the core of modern strategic thinking in business, diplomacy, national security. Much of its most important work didn't come from universities at all. It came out of the Cold War at the Rand Corporation, a US defense think tank. In 1950, Rand researchers Beryl Flood and Melvin Drescher uncovered a result that overturned a basic assumption of rational behavior, that self-interested people naturally arrive at good outcomes. They found it didn't. They came up with a puzzle, and Albert W. Tucker, a Rand consultant, named their puzzle The Prisoner's Dilemma. It remains one of the most unsettling discoveries in strategic thought because it shows how rational behavior can reliably produce bad results. As historian William Poundstone later wrote, 2 members of a criminal gang are arrested and imprisoned. Each prisoner is in solitary confinement with no means of speaking to or exchanging messages with the other. The police admit that they don't have enough evidence to convict the pair on the principal charge. They plan to sentence both to a year in prison on a lesser charge. Simultaneously, the police offer each prisoner a Faustian bargain. If he testifies against his partner, he will go free while the partner will get 3 years in prison on the main charge. Oh yes, there is a catch. If both prisoners testify against each other, both will be sentenced to 2 years in jail. Each prisoner is concerned only with his own welfare while minimizing his own prison sentence. And weirdly enough, this is the same structure we just saw with the four-way stop before. 2 players, 2 choices, outcomes determined by expectations, not trust. So let's put it on a grid. Prisoner A, refuse deal, turn state evidence. Prisoner B, refuse deal, turn state evidence. The top left shows 1 year, 1 year. Top right, 3 years, 0 years. Bottom left, 0 years, 3 years. Bottom right, 2 years, 2 years. And here's what's shocked the researchers. The best collective outcome where neither prisoner confesses is not stable. Each prisoner is tempted to defect because they can't fully trust the other one. And once that logic takes hold, the system drives both prisoners toward a worse outcome. Both confess, both lose, not maximally, but reliably. Poundstone writes, suffice it to say, it is an intellectual riddle that puzzles us today. Now, let's translate that structure from prisoners to alliances. NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is a mutual defense alliance. Its core promise is simple: an attack on one is treated as an attack on all. But here's the game theory truth. An alliance is a machine made of trust, and there are costs for this trust. Every member has to believe, if I take a risk for you, you'll take a risk for me. Now imagine a scenario, any scenario, where a major member signals it may not honor that bargain. The system doesn't collapse because someone defects. It shifts because of the signal that defection might happen. When trust is assumed, cooperation is rational and everyone optimizes inside the system. But when uncertainty enters into the picture, even peaceful actors have to prepare for conflict. Then, defection becomes the norm. It's defensive not because people want to break the system, but because they no longer sure it will withhold. That's why this Greenland discussion isn't about a single decision. It's about what the actions of a single player are and what others are forced to do next. If nothing happens, the signal alone changes the game, because now every other member has to ask, will somebody defect, and why should I keep paying the cost of cooperation? The United States already has extensive military access to Greenland. In 1951, Washington and Copenhagen signed the Defense of Greenland Agreement, granting the U.S. broad basing and defense rights on the island. In other words, from a purely military standpoint, the United States already has what it needs, which means this really isn't about capability. It's about signaling. Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has warned,
if the USA chooses to attack another NATO country militarily, then everything stops. That includes our NATO membership and thus the security that has been established since the end of World War II.
Now, to be fair, this erosion of trust didn't begin with Donald Trump. For years, across multiple administrations, American leaders complained that some NATO members were not contributing enough to their own defense. President Obama warned that the alliance depended on shared sacrifice, not just shared ideals. In his words, the United States could not and should not carry the burden alone. Trump didn't invent this imbalance, but he changed the signal. Instead of pressuring allies within the rules, he questioned the rules themselves. One aide from his first administration complained that instead of playing three-dimensional chess, more often than not, he's just eating the pieces. And in game theory terms, questioning the rules is far more destabilizing than arguing against contributions themselves. And that's how long-running tensions turn into equilibrium shifts. In alliances, grievances strain trust. But defection threats rewrite the game. Game theory doesn't tell us what people should do. It tells us what could happen when incentives collide and no one blinks. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I have enjoyed making it. and I'll see you in the next episode.